I learnt about quicksand and fast rising tides and viewed the sea and the shore with wariness. On one beach, there was a derelict tidal swimming pool. Its crumbling walls contained a thick gloop of estuarine mud, deep enough to cover the body of a young child. I would falter at the sight of the sea through the gaps in the wooden deck of the Grand Pier in Weston-super-Mare. We moved inland when I was 6, and only then did the sea become more inviting. A glass jar of pale yellow periwinkle shells, gathered from a Cornish beach on a childhood holiday, still sits on my shelf. When I left school, I moved to central Scotland to study environmental science and joined a university mountaineering club. The environment that we studied was only ever terrestrial. Occasionally, my hill-walking friends and I would dare each other to swim in the sea in the depths of winter, but I still never really thought of it beyond its surface. The sea remained a place to fear, to admire from a distance. Partway through the voyage to Shetland, the ferry docked at Kirkwall in the Orkney Islands, and there was a brief respite from all the motion and the noise. I envied the Orcadians and tourists leaving the boat. They would not have to face more hours of a turbulent sea. I had been excited to sail past Fair Isle, a small island that lies between the two archipelagos, but when the moment came, I could not have cared less. The ferry journey seemed like a test, and one that I had already failed. In the morning, we left the fetid cabin and saw our first view of Shetland through salt-smeared windows. The land looked bleak and so exposed to the wrath of a storm-driven sea. The swell eased as we sailed into Lerwick through the shelter of Bresse Sound. The sky was overcast, and like our faces, the town looked grey and washed of all colour. But the port was crammed with the bright colours of all the fishing boats and ships that had sought shelter from the weather. Sleek-hulled oil industry vessels loomed over the elegant forms of tall ships with their neat clutter of masts and rigging. Flags and bunting fluttered in the wind. The tall ships were taking part in a race that had begun in Waterford in Ireland and would end in Halmstad, Sweden. The weather had delayed their voyage across the North Sea to Stavanger in Norway. We drove off the ferry and found our way to the familiarity of a supermarket. I poured milk into my son's bottle and tried to warm it against my skin. We had rented a house and needed to pick up the keys from the solicitor, but it was early in the morning, and the office had not yet opened. The wind was still icily cold, and we waited in the shelter of the car. Our son played with the steering wheel, and my husband and I sat and stared out of the windscreen in stunned silence. By the time we arrived in Shetland, I had already become unmoored by motherhood. I had resigned from a job in nature conservation. In the department of the research institute in which I had worked, my pregnancy had felt like an admission of a lack of ambition. I had chosen to have children and not a career, it seemed to me, when I had been hoping, like the men that I worked with, to have both. My husband flies helicopters to and from the oil and gas installations in the North Sea and Northeast Atlantic. He works in an industry that makes no allowances for parenting or for any other caring responsibilities. I knew I would have to take the lead in caring for my son, and this would be to the detriment of a career in which progression is based on a level of productivity achieved through overwork. At times, in those early days of motherhood, it felt as if I was staring at a rainbow